And good afternoon and welcome. My name is Ryan Belmore. I am the owner and publisher of What's Up Noop. It is Tuesday, October 18th. Continuing our conversations with the candidates, we have been chatting with dozens of local and statewide candidates over the last couple of weeks. And Mr. Frank Brosnich joins me when we are chatting with statewide candidates and some others as he has the time and life. You can visit our full schedule, see everybody we've already interviewed, watch the videos, listen to the podcast available on whatsupnoop.com. We have 2 more weeks of these, so we are kind of in the middle part here, Frank.
We are indeed. And tomorrow, just remind people, can begin voting tomorrow, early voting.
Yes, tomorrow starts early voting in Rhode Island. We are just 3 weeks away from Election Day. Vote.ri.gov. You go on there. You make sure you're registered to vote. You find your polling place. You find out how to mail ballot, early vote, or where you're going to vote on November 8th. Most importantly, maybe, is you can see your sample ballot on there. See all the candidates. The earlier you look at it, maybe you can start Googling, reading their websites, see what they have to think, watch these videos, things like that. Lots of candidates. Don't just go Phil Dotson based on what you think of their name. Do a little bit of research, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, indeed. And that's what we're trying to do. We have an interesting race. We have Charles Calenda coming up. He is the Republican candidate for Attorney General. He is challenging Peter Noronha, who is the only, it used to be the only general officer who wasn't term limited. But when Gina Raimondo went to Washington, that kind of changed things a little bit. Peter's running for re-election, and Charles Calenda on the ballot.
Charles is here with us. Chaz is his cousin.
Chaz is summer off. Chaz is out doing lawyer work, I think. So
yes,
trying my best. How are you, Frank? How are you, Ryan?
Hey,
pretty good. How are you?
Very
How are
good.
you? You know what? Let me start. People don't know you. Why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
So I am an attorney, as you pointed out. I started my career back in 2006 here in Rhode Island with the Office of the Attorney General as a Special Assistant Attorney General in the criminal division. So I spent 12 years in that office before going into private practice. I currently work at the law firm of Inman and Torgy, which is here in Coventry. I'm practicing some criminal law, civil litigation, administrative law, and I practiced in some constitutional law defense. So I've got a wide range of experience in the legal field, not the least of which is my time in the Attorney General's office.
What motivates you to want to be the Attorney General?
I'd have to say, Frank, it's my disappointment with the way Mr. Noronha has run his office. In Rhode Island, the Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer of the state. They are the chief prosecutor for all criminal cases and civil matters where it involves the state or state agencies. And instead of being the nonpartisan law enforcement agent, he's been a very political activist. We see him forefront at the State House many times over the last 4 years, particularly on the issues of these gun control bills. I think those are the most recent. He's put his name on it. He's endorsing legislation that had yet to be passed, controversial, partisan to say the least. And at this point, in many courts' opinions, in my opinion, likely to be held unconstitutional by courts as they're challenged, as they're going down one by one.
Let me stay with that for a moment and ask you, we have, I guess, some of the more stringent gun control laws in the country. Where do you come down on gun control, and where do you come down on what states ought to be doing?
I mean, there's nobody out there, Frank, who's advocating for, unlimited access to firearms.
I do think I spoke to one the other day. He's running for governor on the Libertarian ticket.
Well, I mean, I guess I should speak for myself. I don't believe that people who have traditionally been barred from possessing a firearm, like convicted felons, those with certain mental illnesses that would have been historically prohibited from possessing firearms, should have that. But that being said, I 100% support the ruling of the United States Supreme Court that came out this past June that held that law-abiding citizens have an individual fundamental constitutional right to keep and bear arms outside the home. And for that purpose, it's for self-defense, and it's for all firearms in common use. The magazine ban that was passed in June will not meet that test to show that it was part of the nation's historical traditions of restrictions on firearms. And when the Attorney General put his name on it and put his seal of approval on it, I think he was thumbing his nose at the United States Supreme Court.
So you would not put a ban on these magazines, and you would not put a ban on these semi-automatic or automatic weapons?
Well, there's already a ban on automatic weapons. That's been a ban for as long as I can probably longer than I've been alive. The semi-automatic weapons are some of the most common firearms in the world. Yeah, anything from a Glock to a Sig Sauer. Most of these are the ones that people are carrying for self-defense. The Supreme Court held that firearms in common use are protected under the Second Amendment, and there is no historical tradition of banning those types of firearms. So, by banning the magazines that accept 10 rounds or more, which are standard in millions of types of firearms, that effectively is an infringement on the Second Amendment. And other federal courts have already held that is an unconstitutional ban. It's being run through the appeals process, but that other federal courts across the country have already struck those laws down.
So maybe this goes beyond the discussion a little bit. But as a country, we have more mass shootings than virtually any other country. How do you stop it?
Well, we have the laws. You have to work together with your law enforcement agencies. You got to have work together with the community, get community leaders involved, and get people to buy in to a strategy to help get these violent crime for people who are not going to obey these laws under control. It's one where you have to have everybody on the same page. And right now, what I'm seeing across the state of Rhode Island is that the law enforcement agencies and the Attorney General are not on the same page, because some of the biggest critics that I've found of what the current Attorney General is doing are indeed law enforcement, by putting them in a position where now you have law-abiding citizens who may have these maybe 12-round magazines or 15-round magazines that come standard with their legally acquired firearms. And now you're putting law enforcement in a position of having to turn these people into felons. And that's not something they really want to do.
What, beyond gun control, of course, there's so many other issues. Give me a couple of examples where you think that the current Attorney General has fallen down.
So I think his misuse of the grand jury is a big issue. And for those people, who aren't aware of what that means, in Rhode Island, to charge somebody through the grand jury, only time you have to use the grand jury is if there's a capital offense being looked at to charge somebody with. So a capital offense in Rhode Island is one that is punishable by life in prison. We've seen several examples over these last 4 years of Mr. Norona's office using the grand jury to review allegations of police misconduct that don't rise to the level of capital offenses, to present those matters to the grand jury. And we don't know what's being presented in there because it's all a secret proceeding, and then come back with no charges. Now that does two things. That one relieves Mr. Norona from having to comment on it because he can't. The grand jury secrecy rules prevent him from commenting on what was or wasn't presented to the grand jury. And it also relieves him from taking responsibility. He can kind of say the grand jury made their decision and then kind of throw his hands up and say, I have nothing else to say about it. There's a particularly, I think, recent example in Newport where an officer was accused of assaulting a young Jamestown man. And it was on video. The video looked pretty bad. Obviously, I don't see all the evidence, but the video that was released publicly looked pretty bad. They brought it to a grand jury. I don't know why they didn't do that. They've used the criminal information signing, which is the standard route which the Attorney General uses to charge people on many other cases involving police. For example, the Pawtucket officer who allegedly shot a teenager in West Greenwich here while he was off duty. They didn't use a grand jury to go through that. They charged him with the criminal information. I think the grand jury is being used to duck responsibility so he doesn't have to take any political heat from the decisions that are being made.
How about I wanted to take a look at electric rates. You have any thoughts on what has been a pretty significant hike?
Yeah, I think that when it was presented, the deal that Mr. Noronha presented to the public here in Rhode Island, it was not well understood that the electric utilities can only charge what they pay for the actual electricity, but are allowed to make profits on the distribution of it. And so when he said that, we're not going to see any rate hikes for 3 years, and that was part of the deal, that was, led people to believe, that might be a good thing for the state. I think that needed to be further explored, and I don't know if that should have been. There should have been better safeguards worked into that deal to make people understand that that doesn't mean your rates aren't going up, because a big portion, at least half of your portion of your electricity, is the distribution charge, and we've known for many months that we were looking at a increase in those prices coming up, and I think it was it was poorly explained.
But do you think that the outcome should have been different, or that it was just a bad communication problem?
I don't know how the outcome could have been different if this is what the going rate is at this point. I'm not sure the outcome could have been different. But again, I think that's part of the communication. It kind of goes hand in hand with the communication to say, this is all we could do. This is all we could ask for. And this is what we were able to do and what we weren't able to do. But I think it was kind of left out there that, rates weren't going up for 3 years, and people have been upset by that, because we saw I think it was nearly 50% increase in most people's bills that we were expecting to see coming up, I think, in this month.
One of the biggest decisions that Peter Noronha has made was relative to the potential merger of Care New England and Lifespan. Do you think he made the right decision, or do you have questions?
I think he made the right decision when you look at it from strictly an antitrust position. I don't think there's ever a situation in a competitive market, particularly in one that deals with healthcare, that where one entity owns such a high percentage of all the available providers that they're effectively having a monopoly. So on that respect, I think he made the right decision. But I think, it wasn't challenged, so we'll never know. I think they backed out of the potential challenge to the courts. But I think when they made the decision, they kind of gave short shrift to the other side of the argument. So had that been challenged, that could have been a problem going forward if there had been a court challenge.
So as you take a look forward, if you are successful in this campaign, what are your specific priorities over the next 4 years?
Well, the first and foremost, we need to get our crime levels down. I saw the report by the Providence Journal recently. They use very small number of crimes to say, oh, this year crime has been down. I don't think anyone in Rhode Island who works or lives here believes that. You can see it with your own eyes. People tell me almost on a daily basis. They don't want to go out to dinner in Providence. They don't want to go out to dinner in our cities because they're afraid to be harassed and be the victims of crime. What's one thing we got to reallocate our resources within the office to make sure that the people in the prosecutors in the office are being used most effectively to prevent things like, what is commonly referred to as catch and release. So people are arrested one day, released the same day, then get rearrested within days. We just saw it in Cranston. One of the people who's accused on that big fight in Block Islands on the ferry was just rearrested for another major felony. While he was out on bail. It's happening over and over again. So that would be my first priority. Second priority is to make sure the transparency laws in the state are being vigorously enforced. In my opinion, the Attorney General has sat on too many complaints for the Open Meetings Act for public bodies that have been made by individuals, and APRA requests that have been sat on and kind of thwarted by other public bodies. Those have been, in some cases, he's found violations, but chose to do nothing about it. In other cases, he hasn't even issued a response. I think a transparent government is vital to our success here in Rhode Island, and it's just not being done. So those are two of my biggest priorities, along with making sure that, going back to one of the issues that we already talked about, along with making sure that the gun permitting process through the Attorney General's office is consistent with the United States Supreme Court decision, which currently it is not. And Mr. Noronha says he has no plans to change that, despite the ruling.
One of the gubernatorial candidates, a libertarian candidate, not either the Democrat or Republican, is advocating for, I may be correct, the release of prisoners who have been convicted and are serving sentences for drug charges that are not involved with violent crime.
Mhm.
And I presume he's talking about individuals who have who drugs become their own personal problem. They believe in personal choice, but he's saying it's the way that we need to deal with this, and not through imprisonment, but through mental health.
Yeah, and there's a lot of validity to that, because I do think when you're talking about people who are under the addiction, who have an addiction to these substances, there are better alternatives than just mass incarceration. I think a lot of us can agree that the war on drugs failed, and putting people in jail is not going to fix the problem for individual possession, low-level cases that don't involve violence. And to be quite honest, Frank, I'm in court every day, almost every day, and it's rare that you see people with straight possession charges imprisoned at this point. There are some, but do I think it should be a complete mass emptying of the prisons? No, I don't believe that. There are people who are unfortunately involved with other things in addition to those possession charges that require their incarceration for the safety of society. But I do believe that they've taken steps in the most case to make some of these possession charges less severe. The only one I really disagreed with was, and this was pushed by the Attorney General, to make possession of fentanyl 10 grams or less a misdemeanor. That to me was a real problem. I don't really care about the marijuana, the cocaine, or some of the other drugs. That's not really, simple possession of that's not my real priority. It's the possession of up to 10 grams of fentanyl, which poses a severe public safety hazard. You don't have to be an active user of that to be affected. You can inhale that. Somebody has 10 grams of fentanyl. That's a weapon that could be used against our cities and towns in a severe way. So I was disappointed to see that the Attorney General was pushing for that.
On many local ballots, on the referendum side, will be a question relative to marijuana sales, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see the state has already approved it, but it has to be approved on these individuals' communities? Do you see any problems that come about from the wholesale use of marijuana for recreational use?
Wholesale, I don't know if I could call it wholesale. I would probably say that it's not something I would encourage. Again, at the same time, it would never be a priority of mine, even if the state hadn't decriminalized this. I do think that it needs to be up to the individual municipalities, the towns, to determine whether or not that's something they want to support, because we've got to remember, whatever Rhode Island law is, federal law still considers possession of marijuana a crime. And if there's a change of administration, if there's a change in philosophy at the Department of Justice, that's going to cause problems for not only individuals, but it could cause problems for municipalities, cities, and towns. So I do think that the people of each city and town should have a say in how they want to handle that particular issue.
So here's an area that I would guess that you really would not have jurisdiction over, but perhaps maybe an opinion on. And it's been one of the things I try to follow, and that's I look at I'm one of these nerds that take a look at the public filings at the Board of Elections for finance reports, mm-hmm. And I also take a look at the monthly list of delinquents and about the amount of money that is owed to the state, now around $5 million, by people who either have not paid their or have not filed their reports, have been fined, have not paid their fines, and then on top of the fines comes the interest, and it just keeps accumulating. And it's people who haven't filed and people who file late. Gina Raimondo, when she was governor, had supported a bill that never went anywhere that would have put a cap, a limit. If somebody owed a certain amount of money, that they would have been prevented from running for office. I've also talked with the Board of Elections that say that it's very difficult to prosecute these cases, because once you get before a judge, the judge then knocks down the fines, and therefore it's it's not much of a deterrent. And their best deterrent, they say, is in fact public knowledge. And with all that prelude to that, do you see that as a problem? And do you have any thoughts on how we might be able to deal with that?
Well, I do think in the case of severe offenders, people who have run up these, have not done what they're supposed to do as far as filings, or have made expenditures or taken donations, which are in violation of state law, there is a place for the Attorney General to actually do something about that. And I just think it needs to be done consistently. Otherwise, I mean, I don't support something that prevents people from running for office. I think people who are qualified to run for office should, but that's an issue that is fair game, obviously, for the public to be aware of, to make sure that they're getting all the information about these people. But I do think vigorous enforcement of getting those fines, whether they're successful in a criminal case or it's a civil action or an administrative action, it needs to be done, because if we're asking as candidates to be elected to an office, and you have an obligation under state law to comply with certain rules, no matter how onerous they may be, we need to be held to that high standard, because we're asking for a very sacred thing. We're asking for the public's trust. And if you can't do that, then I think the state needs to take whatever actions, short of disqualifying somebody from a ballot for ever running, that would be in the public's best interest.
Other issues that you think are important in this campaign?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues now is, why won't the Attorney General come on TV or radio or any sort of medium and debate his accomplishments that he says he has over these last 4 years? As far as I can tell, this campaign is the only one without a debate going forward as far as state offices are concerned. Every other office, the governor, lieutenant governor, everything else has a debate scheduled or has already had one. Mr. Noronha has declined all invitations to debate me and defend his record. I think it's because he can't defend his record, because when he actually says what he's done and what he's actually said, has to defend that with facts, he's going to be shown to be the partisan activist that he's actually proclaimed himself to be. When he came into office, he called himself an activist AG, and I think his record, that would be one true thing that he has actually told people.
What do you see the role going forward in the Attorney General's office relative to reproductive rights? Now, we've protected it to some degree here, but there are still things that can be done, and there's a potential that if Republicans get into office, that they will try to push a bill that would do a nationwide ban on reproductive rights. Where do you stand on that, and what do you see the role of the Attorney General?
There's not much of a role here in Rhode Island for the Attorney General for that, since it's codified in Rhode Island law, the right to have an abortion. As far as on a national level, and this is really outside the role of what I'd be looking, what I'm think the Attorney General in Rhode Island has to do with. But as far as on a national level, in order for any sort of ban to be enacted through Congress, the Republicans or whatever group is going to try to push for that would have to have a majority in the House, a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, and the presidency. Or they have to have enough senators and House members to override a veto. So it's not a realistic option that they're going to try. There's ever going to be a ban. So in Rhode Island, there's nothing stopping anybody who chooses to get an abortion to get one. And my personal opinion on abortion is not going to affect in any way what I do as the Attorney General, because it's not my role.
And I have to tell you that I can easily respect that position. It's that it ought not to be a part of the conversation relative to this race. You mentioned the debates. Have you approached the Noronha campaign personally about debating?
Well, he won't speak to me, but there have been two organizations that have approached both of us to have a debate. The first one was Channel 12. I was on trial against Mr. Noronha's office that week, asked them to reschedule. I was told he declined, and they decided they weren't going to try to reschedule. The second was State of the State. State of the State reached out and asked us to do a debate. I accepted. There was no response from the Noronha team until the day of, which they said they were going to decline because they thought the moderator would be biased in my favor. I then stated that I would debate him in any forum. He could choose the moderator. He could choose the time. He could choose the format. I really don't care. I think he should have to defend his public record. The fact that he refuses to do so, I think makes him uniquely unqualified to continue to hold this position.
Have you ever run for public office before?
Well, the only elected office I've run for and had was on the nonpartisan Anthony Fire district in Coventry. I held the vice chair position for 2 years.
That's of the fire district.
Yeah, the Anthony Fire district.
The Anthony Fire district. Yeah. What are there other things that you think are important as we look out at the AG's office, and things that you think you can have some kind of influence over?
Absolutely. When I was there for 12 years, Frank, I saw the weaknesses and the strengths of that office, and there are some excellent people working in that office that have been there for a long time and have tried some of the most important cases that the state's seen in its history. Unfortunately, in the last 4 years, really, and even going back a little before that, we've seen a big brain drain. There's the loss of a lot of talented attorneys in that office because, from what they tell me, and they've told me directly, there's too much of a partisan bend in there, and they're not being given the ability to make their own decisions or use the discretion that was traditionally given to these attorneys under prior administrations. That is something I'd like to change if I got into that office, because I know what it's like to be given an order that I know is wrong, and yet not being able to do anything about it, because those people who work for the Attorney General all serve at the pleasure of the Attorney General, meaning they have no job protection. So, the Attorney General could come in one day and say, I don't like your decision that day, you're fired. I think that causes more of a partisan atmosphere, more of a fear-based atmosphere in that office to make decisions which are in the interest of justice than it should be happening. Because really, what the U.S. Supreme Court has termed the prosecutor, in this case the Attorney General in Rhode Island, is to be the minister of justice, not the minister of what's going to help me the best politically. And right now, everything in that office is being viewed through a partisan lens, whether it's going to help Mr. Noronha politically or hurt him politically.
My guess is that most people, when they think about the Attorney General's office, think about it as just one big office, but it is split into a number of divisions. Correct. Within that office. I don't know if you have that readily at hand, but I'm wondering if you could mention some of those that might be more important to people. Where individuals can actually approach the AG's office and get help on individual problems.
Absolutely. I mean, the two major divisions are the criminal and the civil division, but within the civil division, there's probably some units where the people who are having problems with perhaps businesses or local transactions can go for help. The Consumer Protection Unit is one that directly deals with the people, and recent legislation that was passed gives them a lot more ability to effectively do so. So, I mean, that's something that I'd like to continue. And I don't have necessarily any complaints with the Noronha administration using that. I think that's been one of the successes of the office in recent years. And then they have individual units that deal with environmental law. They have individual units that deal with the public utilities law, and all within the civil division. They need to have the right people in there working, using the law to make sure that we're holding, whether it's individuals, businesses, the Public Utilities Commission, or businesses that do business with the state under the Public Utilities Commission purview, that they're being held to account, make sure that everything's transparent and kosher with state law. So those are individual units within the civil division that you see a lot more publicly than some other ones.
Charles, we're just about out of time. I just want to make sure that people know where they can get more information about you, your website.
Absolutely. You can find out pretty much anything you need to know about me. You go to my website at CHAS, CHAS4AG.com. That will take you to all the links for my social media, any commercials, all the information I plan on that I run on, my points of view, and any news that I've been sharing with the public throughout Rhode Island. So I encourage people to go look me up, find out more about me, and know that my overarching goal here, if elected, is to make sure that we keep the law above politics and actually fulfill the role to ensure that justice for all people that come before the Attorney General's office in Rhode Island.
A nifty shirt that you have on. It says Calenda Attorney General.
Got to get the message out one way or the other, Frank.
There you go. Hey, Chaz, Charles, thanks for being with us today. And good luck in the rest of the campaign.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Good luck, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
And once again, people visit vote.ri.gov. Rhode Island voters start going to the polls, I guess you call it, beginning tomorrow with early voting.
Yeah.
And we are just 3 weeks away. Vote.ri.gov to find that sample ballot as well as see a full list of all the candidates you will be voting for.
Ryan, I think we have one more today.
I have a couple more than that.
Oh, okay. Well, I have one more today.
Yes, I have 6 today, so it's a busy day.
It is a busy day.
So, all right, Mr. Prosnitz, we will chat with you again later on.
We will, indeed.
All right. On behalf of Frank Prosnitz, myself, all of us here at What's Up Noop, we want to thank Charles Calenda for joining us today. If you missed any portion of this interview, want to see our interviews with him again or with his opponent, all available on whatsupnoop.com. Thanks for watching.